What if the ugliest piece of jewelry sitting in your drawer right now is actually worth more than your car? These 10 overlooked pieces have quietly sold for life-changing amounts, and there is a real chance you already own one without having the faintest idea. Let us start with the piece almost everyone throws in the giveaway pile without a second thought, because the moment most people see stiff black rubbery jewelry, their brain files it under junk immediately. And honestly, I do not blame them at all. Vulcanite looks like something scraped off the bottom of an old toolbox, dull, dark, and about as glamorous as a tire. But here is what nobody bothers to explain. Vulcanite was one of the very first hardened rubber materials ever molded into jewelry, produced heavily through the Victorian era for morning wear. And serious collectors chase it with a quiet, almost obsessive focus that would genuinely shock you if you saw it up close. A plain vulcanite bangle might bring $40 to $100, which already surprises most people. But the carved floral pieces and the ones with intact gold peak inlay sell for 4 to 6 times that much. A single vulcanite cross with detailed carving has cost $600 at auction. So before you ever toss one of these into a drawer of junk, try the test that has saved people from giving away real money. Run the piece under warm water for a minute, then smell it immediately. If you catch a faint rubbery, almost sulfur-like smell, stop everything, because you may be holding genuine vulcanite in your hand. But the smell test is only step 1. A slightly faded piece with original inlay still beats a shiny black piece with none almost every single time. Vulcanite pins, shaped like anchors, crosses, and clasped hands, common symbols of Victorian remembrance, sit at an entirely different price tier. A detailed clasped hands brooch with visible tooling has brought close to $900 at a specialist sale. The same pin in a garage sale box gets offered for $3. Next, micro mosaic brooches, and I want you to go pull every dark, oddly heavy brooch out of every box in the house. Because the thing that decides its worth is hiding in plain sight, and almost nobody looks closely enough to see it. Micro mosaic pieces look, at a glance, like cheap tourist trinkets, the kind of souvenir you would expect some relative picked up on a bus trip decades ago. And most of the truly mass-produced ones honestly do sell for $20 to $60, which is exactly why people toss them without hesitation. But here is what the experienced buyers are quietly hoping you never notice. Look closely at the tiny tiles. If they are impossibly small, hand-set, and form a detailed picture, a bird, a ruin, a flower with real depth, you are not looking at a souvenir. You are looking at grand tour jewelry made by actual Italian artisans in the 1800s. Collectors are paying for the skill, for the sheer number of tiles packed into a space smaller than a coin, not for the shine. A fine Roman micro-mosaic brooch depicting a temple ruin sold at auction for just under $3,000, and the person who inherited it had absolutely no idea what they were sitting on. People throw away the one detail that proves the thing is valuable, and the heartbreaking part is they never even realized they did it. What most people do not know is that the finest micro-mosaic workshops sat within walking distance of the Vatican, and wealthy travelers on the Grand Tour commissioned custom scenes as one-of-a-kind souvenirs of their journey through Italy. Berlin iron jewelry comes next, and this is the one that fools people the hardest because the material itself sounds like a joke. Cast iron jewelry, black, cold, and about as elegant as a fence post. At least that is what it looks like at first glance. That bluntness is exactly why people dismiss it the second they see it. But let me stop you right there, because Berlin iron pieces were cast with a delicacy that genuinely rivals fine filigree goldwork, and that craftsmanship is the entire reason these pieces have held their value for 2 centuries. These were originally created in the early 1800s, some famously given in exchange for gold jewelry donated to fund wars, which is where the engraving gold gave for iron comes from on certain pieces. Signed and dated examples in good condition routinely bring $300 to $800, and the unusual, intricately pierced designs climb a great deal higher than that. Here's the detail that should really make you pay attention. A single Berlin iron necklace with fine filigree links sold for over $2,000, even with several links showing surface rust. Just think about what that tells you. The piece had visible, obvious damage, and it still pulled in that kind of money purely on the strength of the craftsmanship and the rarity of the design. The very dullness that makes the average person roll their eyes and look away is the exact same thing that makes a serious collector lean all the way in. Scottish agate jewelry fools people just as badly. And this next one is sneaky, because the materials genuinely look like something from a rock shop bargain bin. Scottish agate pieces were built from polished local stones set in silver, banded grays and browns that look, frankly, a little dull sitting next to sparkling rhinestones. So when someone inherits a chunky agate brooch, they take a quick glance, assume it is costume junk, and either bin it or sell it for a couple of dollars. But the value here was never about flash, and that is the whole point everyone misses. It lives entirely in the precision of the stone cutting and the silver work surrounding it, a level of craftsmanship tied to a very specific place and a very specific era of Victorian souvenir jewelry. A genuine Scottish pebble brooch can bring $150 to $500 or more depending on the design and the completeness of the set. And here's the twist that costs people the most. These pieces rarely carry an obvious signature, which means the very pieces worth the most are precisely the ones people feel most confident calling worthless. That misplaced confidence is exactly what empties their pockets. Complete Scottish agate parures, meaning a brooch with matching earrings and a bracelet all in one boxed set, occupy an entirely different tier. A boxed set with its original fitted case has sold for close to $700, while a single loose brooch from the same maker might bring $100. Bohemian garnet jewelry is next, and I want you to think about every dark red, slightly dated looking cluster piece you have ever seen shoved in the back of a jewelry box. This is where a lot of real value gets thrown away without anyone noticing. A Bohemian garnet cluster brooch or necklace looks, at first glance, exactly like the kind of old-fashioned red jewelry your grandmother might have worn to church, heavy, dark, and completely out of style by modern standards. That old-fashioned quality is precisely why it gets passed over, but the tiny rose-cut garnets set close together in silver or gold, a technique perfected in Bohemia during the 1800s, are exactly what serious collectors are hunting for today. A complete Bohemian garnet demi-parure, meaning a matched brooch and earring set, has sold for well over $1,000 at auction. The same set, broken up and sold piece by piece at a flea market, barely clears $100. Flip the piece over and look at the backing. Genuine antique Bohemian garnet jewelry is typically foil-backed and set in a closed back mount, and that single detail can separate a real piece worth real money from a modern reproduction worth almost nothing. The very deepest, wine-colored stones, the ones that look almost black in low light, are the most prized of all, and a single-strand necklace of those darker stones has been known to double the price of an otherwise identical piece. Now, before we get to the next few, I want to talk about a different kind of piece entirely. These are the ones people throw away, not because they look cheap, but because they make people genuinely uncomfortable. And that discomfort is exactly why some of the best bargains in this entire hobby are hiding right out in the open. But before we continue with the rest of the list, there is something most people never realize about valuable jewelry. Some of the most valuable pieces do not look expensive at all. In fact, many end up sitting in jewelry boxes, estate sales, thrift stores, or donation piles, simply because their owners assume they are old-fashioned, damaged, or unattractive. The truth is, appearance has very little to do with actual value. What really matters are the details most people never think to check. Things like metal purity marks, maker's hallmarks, stone characteristics, and construction techniques that instantly separate an ordinary-looking piece from one worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Once you know exactly what to look for, you will never judge a piece of jewelry by its looks alone again. That is exactly why I put together a complete guide breaking down the markings, quality indicators, and valuation principles that professional appraisers actually use to spot hidden value before it gets sold for a fraction of what it is really worth. Whether you're sorting through an inherited jewelry box, browsing estate sales, digging through thrift stores, or just curious about what is sitting in your own drawer, this guide will completely change how you look at jewelry from now on. You can grab it right now using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Now, let us get back to the list. Celluloid jewelry is next, and this might be the single most dismissed material on this entire list. Celluloid pieces from the early 1900s through the 1930s often look like cheap plastic novelty items. The kind of thing you would expect to find in a dollar store bin, brittle, yellowed, and completely unremarkable at first glance. That cheap-looking surface is exactly why people toss these without a second thought. But celluloid was actually one of the earliest plastics ever created, and certain carved and tinted examples, especially figural pins shaped like flowers, animals, or fans, are aggressively collected today. A well-preserved celluloid vanity set or figural brooch can bring anywhere from $80 to $400 depending on the design and condition. Here is the detail almost nobody knows. Celluloid is highly flammable and was eventually phased out for safety reasons, which means surviving pieces in good shape are genuinely scarcer than people assume, and scarcity is exactly what collectors pay for. A carved celluloid dresser box with a matching hair comb and brooch, all in original condition, has sold as a complete set for well over $500, while any single piece sold alone rarely breaks $50. Georgian paste jewelry deserves its own moment here too, because this is the one that genuinely confuses people the most. Paste is glass cut and foiled to imitate diamonds, and modern eyes trained on cheap rhinestones tend to write it off instantly as costume junk from a bargain bin. That assumption could not be more wrong. Fine Georgian paste, made in the late 1700s and early 1800s, was cut by hand with a level of precision that took real skill to achieve. And it was worn by people who could genuinely afford real diamonds but chose paste anyway for daytime wear. A complete Georgian paste necklace with its original closed-back silver setting has sold for well over $2,000 at specialist auctions. The same piece, mistaken for cheap rhinestones and sold at a garage sale, might bring $20 if it is lucky. Hold the stones up to the light and look at the back. Genuine old paste is almost always closed back and foiled, while modern rhinestones are open-backed. That single structural difference is the whole story. A matched pair of Georgian paste drop earrings with intact original foiling has crossed the $1,500 mark more than once, purely because so few complete pairs survived intact. Now, here is the piece people find the most unsettling on this entire list, and I completely understand why. Mourning jewelry made from woven human hair sounds undeniably morbid to modern ears, and casual sellers cannot get rid of these fast enough, practically pressing them into a dealer's hands just to have them out of the house. But this was an entire flourishing industry in the 1800s, worn openly and proudly as a way of keeping a loved one close, and pieces with fine hairwork set in gold frames are actively collected today. The discomfort is the whole opportunity because so many people are squeamish about it. The demand stays quiet and soft, and that is exactly where the knowledgeable collector finds bargains. Everyone else is too uneasy to reach for. A woven hair brooch in a gold frame with a small painted portrait or an engraved memorial inscription can bring several $100s to over $1,000 to a buyer who is actively searching every single week. Look for fine, tightly woven patterns rather than loose, sloppy braiding. The tighter and more intricate the weave, the higher the skill involved and the higher the value follows right behind it. The rarest examples include a woven table-style pattern, an entire scene worked from hair alone, and a documented example of that style sold for close to $2,000 to a museum-affiliated collector. Cinnabar carved jewelry is next, and this one gets dismissed constantly because deep red carved lacquer pieces look, to most people, like inexpensive souvenirs brought back from a trip somewhere overseas. That assumption is understandable, and it is also exactly wrong often enough to matter. Genuine cinnabar involves dozens of thin layers of lacquer built up over weeks and then carved by hand with intricate scenes, dragons, florals, figures, and tiny gardens. That kind of labor-intensive work does not come cheap when it is done properly. A well-carved antique cinnabar pendant or box can bring $150 to $600, and exceptional pieces with deep, multi-layered carving climb well past that. Tap the piece gently. Genuine layered lacquer has a certain density and weight to it that cheap, painted resin imitations simply cannot replicate. If it feels suspiciously light for its size, that is your warning sign. If it feels dense and slightly cool, pay closer attention. An early carved cinnabar box with a hidden second compartment beneath the tray, a detail most sellers never even discover, sold at a specialty auction for just under $1,000. Heavy cluster turquoise jewelry, the kind associated with Southwestern and Native American silver work, rounds out our second to last piece. And here is where people lose real money by assuming bigger and chunkier automatically means cheaper. These pieces, especially older Zuni and Navajo cluster work, get treated as outdated costume jewelry because they look nothing like the delicate, dainty styles currently in fashion. That is precisely the mistake. A signed piece by a known silversmith with natural untreated turquoise stones set in heavy sterling silver can bring $400 to well over $1,500 depending on the maker and the quality of the stone. The same piece, assumed to be cheap tourist silver and sold for scrap weight, might bring $30 at most. Flip it over and look for a hallmark stamp near the clasp. A name, an initial, even a small symbol can be the entire difference between scrap value and genuine collector value. And look closely at the turquoise itself. Natural stone has subtle variation and matrix lines running through it, while dyed or stabilized imitation stone looks suspiciously uniform and flat. A large, signed squash blossom necklace with natural spiderweb turquoise, the kind with fine dark veining running through every stone, has sold for close to $4,000, while an unsigned imitation piece using dyed howlite barely clears $50. And finally, the piece that costs people the most money of all, because it gets sold for scrap value without anyone ever bothering to look at the mark. Old, dark, heavy-looking sterling silver jewelry, the kind that looks dated and slightly tarnished, sitting in the bottom of a box, gets handed straight to a scrap buyer by the gram, and the seller walks away feeling like they got a fair deal. That is the mistake, and it is often an expensive one. Generic, unmarked silver is genuinely worth close to scrap value, that part is true, but pieces stamped with the marks of known silversmiths and design houses regularly bring several hundred to well over $1,000, and the finest documented examples climb into the thousands. Before you ever sell a piece of old silver by the gram, flip it over and read every mark stamped into the metal, because that tiny stamp can be the entire difference between a handful of dollars and a genuine small fortune slipping straight through your fingers. A heavily patinated cuff bracelet stamped with a well-documented studio mark sold for just over $3,000 at auction. Melted down for scrap, the very same bracelet would have brought perhaps $40,000.